Their message for humanity is that, and it's the tenet of many religions, is that we need to become more loving, we need to become forgiving of ourselves and forgiving of others, thus stopping the wheel of karma. We need to focus on becoming more service to others on a daily basis. And we need to focus on raising our vibration and our consciousness.
In the late 1800s, there were secret societies that were already working on advanced travel through space and time. They didn't have a lot of the science down yet, and they didn't have, well, the material science down yet either, but they were trying. And people, even back during this time, were reaching out with their minds to the cosmos, trying to connect with non-terrestrials. I think everyone's heard about in the 1800s the sky ships that would fly looking a lot like dirigibles. And for the most part, they were dirigibles that were tweaked here and there to try to test different ideas and theories in space travel. In the early 1900s, there was actually the concepts of anti-gravity were actually already perfected. And little did they know that at least 5,000 years before that, humans had perfected it already. And we see that in a lot of the writings from ancient India. Dr. Victor Schauberger started studying anti-gravity vortexes in water. And I'm sure y'all have seen David present this information in the past, but it was fairly significant. It was one of the first times that someone outside of a secret society that didn't have access to ancient manuscripts had started to produce anti-gravity effects. There he is right there. And Victor, what he was doing his studies, he realized that the shape of an egg seemed to facilitate the torsion field a lot easier. You got lift when it was placed inside of a torsion field. And of course, he studied fish jumping, trying to go back up the stream to procreate. And he started to observe how some of the fish would move very little. They would get into a certain little zone and they would just be kind of sucked right up the stream. And he came up with all these drawings and to show the concept that he was observing. You can see the shape of the fish. It's not exactly the shape of an egg, but you still have that same oval shape that allowed the vortex in the water to pull it up. And he did the same thing with eggs inside cylinders with spinning water. And I don't know how that one got in there. I didn't know that was there. Eventually, when he was talking about his concepts, the Nazis overheard, and they decided they wanted to have a talk with him about what he had figured out. Well, they were so impressed, they went ahead and kidnapped him and made him a slave, which they were well known for doing. And very shortly after that, the Germans began to fly various types of disc craft using the Bell engine, the Glocke engine. There would be three for triangulation to to focus the gravitational waves. They did try to use conventional kinetic weapons on these craft, but it did not work out very well because when it would, after the report of the weapon, it would cause the craft to move around and become very unstable. They very shortly after the war, they started to learn how to use different types of directed energy weapons. And they started to use directed energy weapons on their craft, but as Michael Sola said before that, they were not armed craft. It's one of the concepts for the bell. Well, since the Nazis could go into space, they started to do so, and they found out very quickly that it can be a rough place. So they began to develop the alliances that they had made through the Vril Society and really started to make deals so they could go to the moon and set up a base, visit Mars, set up a base, without having any pushback from the people that were already there. They cut a deal with the Draco that allowed them to not only stay in large caverns in Antarctica, but also on the moon. And where they ended up setting up it was a base, it looked like a swastika, but it was not as big as they've shown on television and in movies. They were above ground. It was almost like shipping container size, and they were in the form of a swastika. Yeah, that's the nasty group they worked the closest with because they had the same polarity or alignment. Of course, this all began through a channeling group, the Vril Society. And I think they found the most unattractive women they could to be on the in the society. Yeah. That's an online dating ad for the Vril Society. Yeah. Just before the Conscious Live Expo, I had the artist Vashta, who's done a lot of art for Cosmic Disclosure. Well, first of all, I think it'd be easier if you raised your hand if you've never seen Cosmic Disclosure. 3 people? Okay. 3 people. So Vashta put together these few pieces of art here to depict, and that should not be a black sun symbol behind her, it should be a Vril symbol. But this shows the technology of the Vril machines. They were extremely advanced. The Vril Society, they were not wanting to create this type of technology for war. They were looking to expand their knowledge and to bring spiritual knowledge to people as well. That's why they were more interested in the contacts they had with the Nordic groups. Once they had been in contact with the reptilians, they then started to contact people in associated societies, and then the Nazis found out about it very quickly, and they were brought in and questioned heavily. Okay, and something that I know is a bit controversial is back during the time that we were having all these visitations, I guess, men in black type people started to track the vessels that were visiting people and giving them knowledge. And one of them was, as Dr. Sala stated, a person named Sanjasi had been visiting people and imparting some very positive spiritual information to them. And it was far beyond where we were consciously. So it was coming from somewhere else. It was not information that someone had sat and, wrote a little manuscript and said, I want to create a new religion. And of course, they went, and people that were having these visitations, they would go and show them photographs. And there were a couple that were convinced that the picture of Maria Orsic was the person that they had met named Samjasi. The description is pretty uncanny. And the Nazis used Draco territory to build that first little base on the moon. And that base was a real struggle for them in the beginning because they lost people, they had crashes of their disk craft, and they had an even harder time on Mars. When they first arrived there, they didn't have the adequate shielding, and they had an older type electronics technology, and the dust blowing around on Mars created electrostatic discharges that was reaping havoc on their equipment. And what is that from Iron Sky? I think this image of it was nowhere near that size until after it was built out to be the LOC. Whoa. Well, in 1947, Operation High Jump was activated. And the Germans had been informed about some ruined cities, and also caverns that were under the ice and underground. And the Draco were living in the largest area, but they made a deal with the Germans to allow them to move their space program, their fledgling space program, and those in the leadership that they wanted to have escape the Allied forces. And I think y'all are familiar with this one. That's the Anshar craft up at the top. But this is very similar to what I saw when I flew under the ice, in between the ground and the ice. There were huge domed ice caverns, and the geothermic heat was coming up and melting the ice, and it was like a giant igloo. It was amazing. Now the Nazis could only get so far with their resources. They were very familiar with the American industrial might. We were producing 10 planes and tanks for every one they were during the war. So the industrial complex in the United States was coveted because they had big plans. The Draco and them wanted to expand our infrastructure in space, and the Draco ultimately wanted us to fight side by side with them against their enemies and also help them in conquest of other star systems. They first started making contact with our government through Project Paperclip scientists. A lot of the Project Paperclip scientists were still in contact with the Nazi factions in Antarctica. So they were trying to facilitate the first meetings, which the US government was not real excited about. And for 5 years, it really went nowhere. So the Nazis figured they would force our hand, because through the Project Paperclip scientists, they found out that the existence of non-terrestrials was the highest classified information in the land, way higher than anything having to do with nuclear weapons. So they saw that as a linchpin. They could fly around and show their vessels, or have information about non-terrestrials come out, or threaten to do that, which is what Iran did recently. If you remember in January, they put out a big story saying Snowden has everything on aliens, that they're tall whites that are running the U.S. government. And it was a matter of weeks later, we gave them $1.6 billion and pretty much agreed to everything that they wanted in the sanctions treaty. So there was a lot going on behind the scenes on that. In 1952, the flyover of the Capitol occurred. Everyone's familiar with that. This troubled the DoD, the Department of Defense, very much, because they were under strict orders to, no matter what, never reveal any information or the existence of non-terrestrials. And now they have, flying saucers flying over the Capitol. And if this was to happen today with all the iPhones, it would be over. We would have some sort of disclosure. David tells me that's an actual photo, but I haven't verified that myself. In 1952, Eisenhower began to have the meetings with about a half a dozen different groups, including the Blues. And these were very tall, blue, non-terrestrial that had some features like grays, but they were a totally different group. And the military-industrial complex guys called these people space hippies, because they came down and were preaching love and peace and get rid of your nuclear weapons. And a military power doesn't understand any of that. So they just blew them off. A little bit later that year, Eisenhower finally meets with the Nazi breakaway group, and an agreement is made to join forces in a loose way. And of course, the US planned to infiltrate and take over the space program that the Nazis had started. And as we see now, the opposite is what happened, because they were already dug in like a tick. The Nazis were. There was no way that we were going to. Yeah, it's a Texas colloquialism. And finally, in 1955, a treaty was signed with the breakaway German group, and from that point on, they really started to infiltrate and take over the different corporations. The Germans were seated in every aerospace corporation that there was. And of course, very soon after that, we have the founding of NASA. And then we had probably about 3 decades of brain drain of the best and brightest in all over the world were being recruited very quietly for these secret programs. And 25% came from the United States, with the remainder coming from the rest of the world. And they were heavily pulling people from Eastern Europe and South America. In South America, it was openly advertised. All in all, 55 to 60 million people were pulled into these programs. If half of those people lived through the process and then had children and their children had children, just imagine the number of people that are out there in space right now. And they openly advertised in South American countries, especially Brazil. The recruits were told that this was an extremely important operation, that it had to do with the continuity of species, that we had all of our eggs were in one basket. Here's another one for you. That if a meteor struck or some sort of cataclysm happened that was an extinction level event, that humanity would be wiped out. So their idea was to create a base on Mars and began to start trying to terraform Mars. But that ended up being kind of a cover story. It was, they were deceived, and they ended up living a life of slavery. And then their children were they were tested to see how they would best serve the population, and then they were forced into different marriages at very young ages and forced into careers that they probably would not have chosen on their own. Around 1980, Solar Warden was formed. It wasn't completely autonomous and on its own yet, but they had most of the vessels developed, at least the concepts, and they were building them in a huge cavern down in Utah. And most of the engineering crew were living on the vessels as they were being built. So they knew how to, take apart the craft, put it back together, and were a part of the process. In 1980, a lot of people heard about President Reagan's briefing. It really happened, and President Reagan was briefed on non-terrestrials, I believe 4 or 5 at the time. He was told non-terrestrials that were interacting with humanity for thousands of years. And also he was informed about our Solar Warden, about our secret space program and its capabilities. And from what I understand, he was pretty blown away, and he was extremely excited and wanted to push the agenda even more than what they expected him to. And there were certain times when he got up and talked about, if the world were attacked, how quickly we would forget our differences and come together. He was living and breathing this stuff. It was at the top of his important list. During that time, strangely enough, nuclear armament and the Cold War increased instead of decreasing. And a lot of this was a cover story, because at a certain point, the Russians and the Americans were working together. And they were also both working together also to look for a way around this breakaway German situation. They were all being infiltrated and controlled by this group. So the Americans and the Russians were trying to figure out a way to mitigate how much power the Nazis had over both countries. Solar Warden in the mid-'80s really began to expand. They started building, they had one fleet in the beginning. They had one of the giant cigar carriers, and they wanted to have 8 battle groups. So once they built the first battle group, put it out into space, tested it, put it through its paces, they immediately put all their resources into duplicating as many as they could. This is one of the carriers, and if you look closely, you can see the torsion field. It's a left-right torsion field, spinning the opposite directions. And on one side, it's a smaller field to where it's almost like you squeeze a bar of soap and it shoots out one way. So when William Tompkins saw this image, he was taken back quite a bit, because it looked exactly like what he had been designing. In the torsion field that I had the artist add in there was what really blew him away. The German moon base that was shaped sort of like it was shaped like a small swastika was then turned into what we know as the LOC today, the Lunar Operation Command. And it was after this point that they started learning how to build bases on Mars. The Germans in the beginning were finding ancient buildings and were pressurizing them and using them in the beginning. And then they started learning how to build bases out of local materials. That information was passed on later on to Solar Warden, and I took part in some of those there were security outposts that were being built out of kind of like 6-foot long sandbags that were filled with the local earth and then stacked up on each other. And then they sprayed them with this stuff that's kind of like the truck bed lining. And then they sprayed them with other types of insulation and then pressurized them and let people inhabit them. On my Christmas break in 1986 is when I was taken and brought into the 20 and Back program. This is a depiction of the research vessel I was assigned to, much smaller than the cigar-shaped carriers. This was probably about maybe a 16th the size of the carriers. They're absolutely huge. Well, eventually, during this time that Solar Warden was developing and really starting to grow, the German group that had already formed ties with the Draco, they really started to develop their technology beyond what Solar Warden had with the help of the Draco. And they formed what became known as the Dark Fleet. And these were offensive forces. They were going out for conquest. They were going out if there was a problem in a certain star system, a rebellion and that needed to be put down, Dark Fleet would be sent, or they would fly alongside Draco ships and do battle. A joint Draco, and it's not really a joint Draco. There's a moon base that's shaped like a trapezoid, and this Dark Fleet controls the base, but there are also non-terrestrials that are on it quite often, working alongside. And Solar Warden could not find out what was going on inside of that base. It was almost impossible to get intelligence from. And it wasn't until later on when there was when the SSP Alliance formed and we started to have defectors from the Dark Fleet that we really started to find out what all was going on there. And it was very disturbing. That's a pretty close representation of what the base looks like. I saw it from further away than this. But it's a place where a lot of dark things go on. There was a former Air Force, a person that was in the Air Force, I can't remember her name right now, but okay, and she was taken to this place for days at a time, and she was worked like a slave, and all sorts of horrible things were done to her, and that gives you just a little taste of what goes on there. Very little was known about Dark Fleet. We knew they existed. We would see them around. They were just very arrogant, very elitist, felt like they, pretty much owned everything. But at the time, Solar Warden had no idea that they were working alongside the Draco and flying outside of our solar system to fight alongside the Draco. If we had known that, it would have been very difficult to make eye contact with them without some of the guys, starting a fight with them, because the Draco were not at all liked in Solar Warden. The operative, there's so much that is similar with the Dark Fleet and what you see on Star Wars. It cannot be coincidence. The way they dress, wearing all black, it's just uncanny. How they carry themselves, they look the same, kind of pale, gaunt, like they haven't had sun ever. Very vitamin D deficient. That's very close representation to the way they dress. And of course, their vessels, the wedge-shaped ones, looked very much like the ones off Star Wars. Then we have the interplanetary corporate conglomerate. It's the most powerful secret space program. They control the design and build out of all technology. So pretty much any of the corporations that you associate with the military industrial complex, they have had their CEOs or board members, once they get 20 years in and are trusted, they'll be approached and told, listen, why don't you retire, and then we'll put you on this super board. And on the super board, they would be working in interplanetary affairs and making decisions on who would get what technology would be hidden from what group. And of course, they keep all of the best toys for themselves. They're the most advanced group out there. Of course, they were kept a secret from Solar Warden in the beginning. It didn't take long, though, for us to figure out that there was another group out there when they were showing up at the LOC, when our group would come in to, for leave. These were cosmic capitalists. All they could see were dollar signs or a way to obtain more technology and biological materials from outside of our solar system. So they began to figure out ways to capitalize on what the non-terrestrials wanted from us, and also the different space programs, the technologies that they wanted. They would develop it just as far as they wanted that group to excel. They would hold them back by the amount of technology they would give them. And of course, they withheld all the best things for themselves. Very soon, they established bases on moons around some of the gas giants. Of course, a lot of the area on the moons around Saturn and Jupiter are territory of non-terrestrials. When we were doing studies around Jupiter, there was very little airspace around Jupiter that we were allowed to travel through because of non-terrestrial embassies. That's what we called them, as embassies. Well, they figured out very quickly that they wouldn't be able to keep this a secret if they have people mining ore and putting things together all over the place here on the planet. They had worked for years in compartmentalization, having people putting a screw in here and then pass it on to the next, it'd be shipped to another location, and then they would put that part inside of another part, so no one got a full picture of what they were putting together. Well, they finally decided that the best idea was to build out infrastructure on Mars for mining and industrial complexes for fabricating the materials they mined into usable materials. Some of the manufacturing plants on Mars house 250,000 people, support them. So they have living quarters very nearby the manufacturing plants where these people live. And I can tell you that the conditions they live under are very Spartan, and they don't get to raise their hand and object to anything. I myself was pretty shocked when I was brought to the Mars facility and I got the dog and pony show from the ICC, and they showed sort of like slideshows like this, but of all these different technologies of craft, components that they produce and trade to over 900 civilizations that And these civilizations mostly stop by here when they're traveling further distances to pick up supplies or replacements for technology that they're having problems with. And we got the reputation very quickly of being very meticulous and sharp engineers, which, as Dr. Solis said, that's really hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around when, we're still using, combustion engines from the late 1800s. Well, the touchy subject, the interstellar slave trade. This group saw that different non-terrestrials were taking people off the planet, so they saw a chance, they saw an opportunity. They saw us as a commodity. They figured, why don't we do a blockade, not allow the non-terrestrials to come in, and we ourselves will abduct people and then trade them to the non-terrestrials for technology and biological specimens. And the scale of this slave trade is so large that if we do get a full disclosure, that's going to be one of the most shocking things about this whole cover-up. We have the Global Galactic League of Nations. This was a carrot that was offered to all of the member nations of the, of the UN. And it was proposed that they give all of these nations a part or a place in the secret space program as long as they guaranteed they would not let the cat out of the bag, that there were non-terrestrials and that we had advanced technologies that would collapse our economic system. In their mandate, for security reasons, they were to operate completely outside of our solar system. And before I was brought into the secret space program, when I was in the MyLab group, I was brought to one of their facilities. It was on a moon of a gas giant in another star system. They believe that they're working on the continuity of species and protecting us from a non-terrestrial invasion. So they believe very heavily in what they're doing. They're compartmentalized from other secret space programs. They know very little about other space programs, and other space programs knew very little of them, if anything. They wore uniforms that were, very much like Stargate Atlantis. They had their country patches on one shoulder and the project patches on another shoulder, and they were jumpsuits that were very similar. And I don't think that was a coincidence either. Of course, I visited the base that I just mentioned. I visited there a few times. Then we have the unacknowledged special access programs that are ran by the military and intelligence groups. And they have a lower spectrum of technology available to them. It is closer to our technology, our current technology. There are multiple programs. The Russian program falls under this as well. And they all vary in sophistication. And if they see another craft fly by that is unknown, they are told that it's a concept craft that is being developed and not to speak about it among themselves. So it's a real easy way, if they see a non-terrestrial craft or a craft from one of the other space programs, that's a real easy way to cover it up, even in the lower military programs. They're told that there are no ETs currently visiting humanity. And I've been surprised at how deeply they believe they're being told the truth. They're aware of the ancient builder race ruins. They've investigated some of them. And again, they were told that this is from millions of years ago and has very little bearing on what's going on today. And of course, they work within mostly the military-industrial complex, and they're unaware of any of these other secret space programs I'm telling you about. They will vehemently oppose you if you try to bring it up to them, because they believe they're at the top of the totem pole when it comes to intelligence, that if they have the need to know all of the cosmic disclosure information that you guys are getting. But they are certain that there are no space programs above them, there are no non-terrestrials visiting us now, and some of them do believe that we're being visited by time travelers from our future. That is what we're seeing in the skies. That's when I was abducted by one of these groups. That's what they were trying to push down my throat, was that I've been deceived that these different groups were us from the future. These groups fully expect to be a part of a disclosure narrative. They've been prepped, they've been told that the information about their program is going to be released in the near future, and that after that happens, that they are going to be kind of, like astronauts, how people worship the astronauts in the 60s. And they're looking very forward to this partial disclosure that they're a part of. And, to be honest, they've had a lot of casualties in their program, and they want some recognition. They believe that they're fighting the good fight, that they're a positive group. And they're going to be more surprised than we are if, in a full disclosure scenario. They're really going to be upset. No, it's not Solar Warden. It's the lower military and intelligence programs. Well, in the 80s, we started to have giant spheres coming into our solar system. In 1980, there was a giant, I think it was the size of Neptune, but it was a physical metallic craft that was just huge. And it came in and it started flying around the different planets, just like it was doing a joyride. And we hailed it and asked, what are you doing here? And they said they were just on a cruise, basically. And our secret space program pretty much ran them out, told them to get out or there was going to be conflict, and this group left. And the secret space program had no idea that there were craft this size out there. They were shocked by the size of the vessel. In the late 1990s, all of a sudden, all of these giant spheres started, and spheres that were tangible, metallic, and these energetic spheres that I've been talking about started to come in from the outside the solar system. And also, they started to come into our solar system through using the sun as a portal. And of course, the Cabal thought that it was a return of their Sumerian gods. And I heard in the Pentagon, there were admirals and generals that were talking about the return of the Sumerian gods. But if the spheres were not what they thought they were. When they moved into our solar system, they positioned themselves and then phased out. And our secret space program knew where they were, and we would approach them and try to hail them, but would get no answer whatsoever. They were completely ignored for a long period of time. And here are some Soho images many of you are probably familiar with. Some of these are orbs that are streaking across, so they look like solid lines. Look at that. Yeah, it's the sun. That little disc in the front is what they use to block the sun so that it doesn't blind the instruments that are looking at the corona. And with every one of these, in every one of these cases, we've checked with the planetary software, tracking software, and there are no planetary bodies in this area. These are streaks. Look at that one. Yeah, no straight lines there. It's just... Here's a close-up. Okay. I think I have the planetary tracking on this one. But as you see, these are planet-sized objects. These are not objects that are close to us and appear, because of the position of where Soho is, they can't be small objects that are close to Soho. And also the way the instruments work on Soho with how it focuses in on, it only focuses in on objects that are further away. So the military industrial complex and the various space programs are sitting back watching this unfold. More and more spheres coming into the solar system, not announcing themselves as you're supposed to. As you come in, you give a friend or foe either signal or communication. And all of these craft were coming in and ignoring the status quo or the proper way of coming into the solar system, and were just cloaking. So the secret space programs, they were getting more and more concerned. Here we go. You can see the objects. We tracked where planetary bodies would be, and down where the one sun cruiser is, there's nothing on the software. Look at that. Yeah. Now, NASA says that these are two comets that are traveling equidistant from each other and just happen to crash into the sun at the same time, which is astronomically impossible. Yeah, not likely if you ask me. "50 comets." So at this time, we already had quite a few spheres coming in. But in the 90s, the secret space program, they were in a observation mode. They knew that there was nothing they could do about it. They didn't know the intentions of the spheres coming in, but they were just trying to gather as much intel as they could. In 2012, when everyone expected some major event to occur, well, I guess it was occurring. We just didn't know about it. We didn't have the ability to see what was going on. But in 2012, hundreds of these spheres, the size of the Moon, Jupiter, and Neptune, started to come into our solar system. The groups that were observing this and that were concerned went into a panic. They now understood that these spheres were not here to help them in their agenda, but they didn't know why they were here. Yep. And I guess that brings us to the end of my first presentation. Thank you.
I have some questions. I was interested, of course, about some of the Semyasi information. You mentioned that the secret space program, or the Nazis originally had questioned the Vril girls. What came of that questioning, and what happened to them, and from your understanding, and how they didn't rein them in or control them, or what happened to them?
Well, they were very well connected with other societies. So the Nazis couldn't really just, pull them in by their hair and make them do what they wanted them to do. They had friends in high places. So
who, and like in what kind of high places? I mean, were they Nazi assets, or they were already traveling in outer space?
They had connections to people that were high up in the Nazi Party and in other societies. They worked closely with them, so they had friends in high places. So it'd be very difficult for the SS to just grab them and throw them in an internment camp or something like that. Mm-hmm. They had too many friends.
So they questioned them and then released them, and what happened? Was the girls did they each have their own ship? Was this supported by Vril society groups? After traveling autonomously, separate from the Nazi parties?
Yes, they were autonomous from the Nazi Party. They provided the Nazi Party with the information that was requested. They put them in contact with non-terrestrial groups. They provided them with copies of all their schematics of their ships. But they had very wealthy donors that helped them build out their program, and their program was non-military. It was to go out and explore, and they were very interested in the spiritual aspects of what was going on. They were not mm-hmm. looking, the answers they were looking for were more of a spiritual or esoteric nature.
Right.
So even though they were German during the time of World War II, when the Nazis were in control, they were very opposed to that way of thinking and that energy. They had to work with the Nazis a little bit, but as soon as they had their own craft built, their own space fleet, they were broken away. And they did have a small base down in the Antarctic area and in South America, but it was not associated with the Nazi group.
And they were left alone, the Dracos and the other groups that were working kind of counterproductively in Antarctica. They were they were a very small Earth-based civilization, or did they have protection from other higher spiritual forces? They
were working closely with some of the Nordic groups.
Okay, so positive Nordic groups.
Right, and they received a lot of spiritual information and teachings mm-hmm. from mm-hmm. these groups, and they were adamant about sharing it with humanity, but they they could not, under the confines of what the Nazis and Americans had agreed upon. If they were to appear as Earth humans and start imparting this knowledge openly, they would then be in conflict with these military-industrial groups.
So they had opposed that as extraterrestrials.
Correct.
Now, do we know, do they have bases in the Pleiades and things of that nature? Were they in contact with groups and had bases?
They were in contact with groups, but the bases they had were here. But they did travel outside of the solar system for a number of years. As Sala said, they were gone for a number of years. They came back. And then, I believe it was the early 70s, they disappeared again. So apparently, either the certain people they were tracking died, or they went off planet and out of the solar system.
And so that was the last we heard of them in the early 70s?
Yeah, it was in the 70s. I think it was the early 70s. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, and Fred, the experiences I were having with the ships, and I had many sightings of ships with Fred and around the house and in various situations, were in the late 70s and into the 80s. So the other question is they're very young. Do they have the magic pill that William Tompkins talks about? Was that developed at that time?
Yes, the Germans had access to age regression technology from the reptilians very early.
Very early.
Yes, very early in their program. It was handed over, but if you hand over a technology like that, you have to go through a R&D. They have to break it down. Even though they are told exactly how it works, they've got to marry that with their current knowledge and understanding of technology and chemistry, the human body. So there was a number of years to where they had to close the gap knowledge-wise. Just like if we were to have full disclosure today and they were to disclose all of these technologies would not be in our hands for several years. It would take that amount of time for them to start to develop it in the numbers that would be needed for 7 billion people.
Why didn't they give that, the Nazis, Hitler was kind of the big guy, why didn't they give that to him?
The reptilians?
Or, well, the secret space program and the Nazi group, why didn't they give that, the youthful aspect, to Hitler? Or he was just a figurehead and there's actually another group? Or
yeah, Hitler was not that important to the process of what was going on. He was, like Dr. Sala said, he was more like a figurehead or a puppet. A lot of the people in these societies were what was really running everything.
Right, so it's kind of like he wasn't really the Darth Vader. It's like when the Dracos came in, they go, oh, that's a more powerful figure that they were attracted to vibrationally. Another question, you said that they traveled outside the solar system and would devour other groups that was an uprising. Can you talk about where these were these Nordic groups, were these different, and how far afield was the U.S. secret space program, Draco Dark Fleet, going and acting as the Greys or the insectoids also were used by the Dracos of this way?
Well, Dark Fleet, they were traveling within our local star cluster of 52 or 53 stars, depending on who you ask.
Okay.
So it was within this local star cluster that they were assisting the Draco with putting down rebellions and also going in and taking over new areas. And there were quite a number of star systems that were controlled by the Dracos for a while. That's only changed recently.
Okay, so they had a lot of these. Now, obviously, the Dracos were traveling, and they knew who these giant these giant spheres, when they come, they've obviously seen that they cleaned up other solar systems.
Yes. Apparently, the Ambassador Mika that I just was introduced to, It's only been 3 generations since his people were liberated from almost exactly the same situation we're in. And he said that one of their lifetimes was about 320 cycles or orbits around their star. Don't know exactly how that translates into our time, but it's got to be somewhat close to a year.
So 320 years.
Right.
The White Draco, that you had that intense thing, one of the main leaders who's using all that. I mean, did they know that was coming? Like that the blue spheres they've cleaned up other systems obviously before us?
Yes, there are, I'm told, 2 star systems that the Draco have retreated to, and ours is unfortunately one of their strongholds. So they've all been kind of chased to this one star system mainly, and they're going to be dealt with here. I wish they were being dealt with in another star system.
Right. So there's one other star system that, and they used to range out there, and
yeah, the closest 12 or 13 stars in our local star cluster were completely controlled and managed by the Draco at one point. But that wasn't, it's not always consistent. Throughout time, we've had Nordic groups, different groups that have come in and chased the Draco away, and then the Draco always come back. They always came back. And there's one group that works very closely with the Draco, and we've assumed that they are a conquered race, or they're a race that made a deal with them, much like the German breakaway group did, that fight alongside them, and a lot of people will see, and they'll call them Nordics. They have a little bit longer of a forehead. They have kind of a chili bowl cut around. They all have the same haircut. And they have 6 fingers in each hand. And they're very muscular, they're very large and muscular.
Right. The contactee, Bob Bernaud, who was giving information and who works with a group called the Corindorians, he calls them the Omegans, and said that they're part of they actually call them the syndicate, and they're basically just very ruthless, and they want what they want, and they take what they take, and they get what they get, and it is kind of like about
yeah, they're a very militaristic and rough group to work with.
This brings me to the question of the slave trades. We have 900 different groups that they're trading with, and it's kind of like we're waking up, we don't want to buy chocolate that has children as slaves, or Walmart, or we want to be ethical in our actions. It seems like, I would think, the Super Federation, foreign and benevolent groups wouldn't want to do trade with the earth based on the way that the technology is created. Can you talk about that number of 900? Are all of these negative groups?
Many of them don't even know what's going on here. They don't know many of the groups that they're traveling from our galaxy to another galaxy, from star system to star system, and they stop in, pick up supplies, trade for technology that they may need for their journey, and then move on. And they do this in many other star systems as well. So it's kind of a cosmic commerce that goes on. They don't get involved in each other's political affairs, and they are amoral towards a lot of what is going on with the slave trade.
Large numbers of groups are amoral to
Yes.
to this.
A lot of these groups, they do not process information the way we do. We use our mind, our emotions, and how a certain subject makes us feel. We'll viscerally respond, have a visceral reaction to, and then we'll make a decision on how we're going to interact with a certain person or group. A lot of them are very, I guess, Vulcan type. They They don't show a lot of emotions. They've got a narrow spectrum of emotions compared to us, and they are out going about their agenda.
Have you heard, I don't know if the Super Federation 40, but I understand there's kind of like there is a cosmic news channel. There's certain alliances that are very much aware of what's going on here and do communicate, but it sounds pretty wild out there. You'd like to think there's more order, but it's pretty communication, and certain groups are allowed to come in here and make trade.
Yeah. If the interplanetary corporate conglomerate, they don't care who they do trade with. It can be a somewhat positive group. It can be a completely negative group, or some of these groups that all they do is travel around the galaxy trading and engaging in commerce. That's all they do.
What is the theory of why are they those comets that crashed into the sun? Were they leaving?
Yes.
Through the portal. They've been here, did a little thing, and
right. They're portaling out through the sun.
Okay. What are the ET groups that are taking slaves? What are they doing with them?
Any number of things. Believe it or not, we're known as being very clever engineers. So a lot of people are being, okay, first of all, let's discuss how the slave trade works. You have all of these syndicate groups here on the planet that hire different groups and gangs to go out and obtain people. And they're given a shopping list. We need someone that's good in this kind of math and this kind of technology, or we need females that look like this, young males that look like this, and they're taking orders.
All right. Now the reptilians, this is disturbing, but Alex Collier had mentioned that the reptilians prefer younger children. They actually feed on them. Is that some of
the people that are abducted from the surface are brought below the earth for those kinds of
unfortunate situations?
Yeah. But others are taken out to various facilities where they're separated and then sent to other facilities where they are physically handed off in a trade for either technology or biologicals from another star system. And it took us a while to figure out when our vessel would come in and offload certain technology or information from the different labs on the ship. We're doing different testing. They would offload the results, and we would, if we were headed back towards Jupiter Station, they would load us up with what looked like giant cases that you would think would carry missiles or equipment. It was quite a while that we were transporting these types of cases, that some of the people started to look in them and found out that they were human beings in some form of stasis.
Stasis, yeah, I figured.
And yeah, there were women, children, people of all ages.
Yeah. Is there sex trafficking like that in outer space too?
Yeah. Humans are used for food. They're used for building things as slaves, for sex slaves. There is many things as you could sit back and imagine. That's what's occurring.
It's pretty disturbing. So
it's incredibly disturbing.
Seems like there's a lot of planets that need a lot of healing, and the law of one is absent there.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess they've got a lot more solar systems to clean up. How long have we known about that they've been cleaning up this local star cluster? These two star clusters from 52 stars, I think you said, down to 2 now with the Dracos, and they're doing that.
Yeah, that's not something that people would really know in the secret space program, because the Draco, if you have a little enclave of people that you're controlling, and you're getting your butt kicked in another enclave,
Yeah,
you don't
right.
want them to know,
Right,
because
right.
they may feel empowered to liberate themselves.
Any information from the Raws on that? Have they given you any information of their previous thing with Micah? Do you get any questions and answers of what
No.
their agenda is?
No, I just got a basic overview from Micah on what his people had recently been through, and he stated that his people had been through something similar. They didn't have nearly as many problems to overcome as we do, but there are enough similarities that his people are going to be very instrumental in helping us once we accept their invitation to come and help, and after there's a full disclosure event.
So when we accept,
And he literally told me that they are our cosmic cousins. There's, they're like 94% of their genetics is the same as ours.
right? So they'll be they're going to offer their help. They have offered their help. Who did they offer their help to?
That was an
And
official offer that he made. He wanted. There are certain people in the space program that know of the offer, but general population of the Earth didn't know.
why does this secret space program damage Solar Warden that won't give you healing? Why are they our representatives to accept or reject that offer of help?
Well, that's now that the offer of help is in the consciousness of everyone here. Everyone here is making the decision whether they want them to come or not.
You mentioned the number 250,000, the manufacturing plant. Was that the Mars explosion that the secret space program, they blew up a manufacturing
That was one
plant?
of them. Yeah, there was a key component for a neuro interfacing component that was being made at this one base, and they saw it as kind of
Advanced AI that they didn't want out.
no, it wasn't advanced AI. It was a technology that was sold to non-terrestrials and used in our craft that allows pilots to interface with their craft through their neurological system. No more fly-by-wire sticks or anything like that.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because you're flying this fast, you can't really make adjustments manually. If it's tied into your neurology, then it's instantaneous decisions going to the onboard computer.
According to Fred, that was how Semyasi or Marina Orsic, if that's possible, was using. It was actually like that disc.
Yeah, they had to, or
They have a
you'd crash
disc.
into the ground or into a mountain.
So they are already using that. The secret space program doesn't have it, but the Vril had it.
No, the secret space program has it.
Oh,
Yeah, that's how most of these.
So why did they destroy that? That just slows them down on their.
This is. It was being manufactured in very large numbers for trade to non-terrestrials, and also to be put into ICC and Dark Fleet vessels. So that was to slow down the expansion of those military groups.
And that's unfortunate, and the collateral damage was enormous from
It
the
was,
innocent abducted people. 55 to 60 million people, that's really a lot of milk carton kids and others. I mean, I guess are they just unable to, they just control the media and the police, and people just don't know what happened to their loved ones, huh?
No, yeah, I think David's kind of told about how they work. They would give the people a job, promise them they're moving to a Jetsons kind of environment, showed them videos of a lot of the very advanced underground bases that we have for the elites, and told them that's where they were going, and just completely disinformed them before they left.
Why do you think that you were age regressed for 20 years. Why wouldn't they just let you age naturally? I mean,
the whole age regression was put into place as a part of a large treaty with non-terrestrials and between these secret space programs, that the people that were taken out not only for the 20 and back, but there were people taken for other things as well, that if these people had to be returned to the same time period and have no memory of what had occurred. And that didn't matter if they were taken away for an hour, taken away for 30 days or 20 years. That was the mandate.
who was mandating that?
It was a general mandate it was an agreement.
Between benevolent extraterrestrials?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call them, it's not all cut and dry, good or bad. Some of these beings, the way they think and operate, they consider themselves neutral and amoral.
But all these other people can die, but the secret space program, they had a deal where they were kind of like trying to manage some of the damage to humanity. I mean, the Nazis would have just as soon killed you and ended your
a lot of it has also to do with if you have a cohesive military force and they see that assets are being brought in and used and abused and then killed or allowed to die, that's going to affect the morale. They're not going to be following orders like they should. So if they know that certain people are coming in, they're serving, and then they're being sent back safely, that's going to keep everything together and working.
Okay. Let's see. This is another controversial one for me because I have a friend. Fred claimed that he went to Lyra as well, and that they had the neural interface and it works on the aura and the command of the ship. Dr. Frank Stranges has been to Venus and been welcomed there, and from the interior Venus. But this question is: Commander Valiant Thor part of the space program and planet's dominion? Now,
I didn't hear the question.
is Commander Valiant Thor part of the Sphere Being Alliance? I'm not sure about that. I know he's a different group from Venus, is what I feel. You've told me that you think he's from the inner Earth. Dr. Frank had been to Venus on several occasions and had been welcomed there and stuff like that. So, and I want you to qualify this. This is glass pad information. How do you know it? And what is your information?
Well, I was not familiar with Thor or any of that information when I was in. So this is what I've kind of postulated since I've been out, and I've been asked about it over and over. Okay. And knowing that there's an inner Earth group that is very powerful. It's not a militaristic group, but they have a strong military that is in charge of protecting Venus and the ancient builder race technology that is active. That they look very much like they look exactly like we do.
So they go back. They have bases on Venus, but you think they originate here, or they live, many of them live on Venus.
They live on Venus, and they live here below ground.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what made me make the leap that he could possibly be one of the inner Earth groups.
My feeling is this group doesn't lie or have a preposition or any agenda, that they come from Venus. Omnek talked about him. So she actually came from the astral plane of the fourth dimension. One of the unique things about Corey is he's very fresh in metaphysical stuff and a lot of stuff he's very new to, and he just reports what he's getting, and it's fresh, and we're like with him in the learning process. So, okay, well that answered that question, and obviously there's different groups. One of the Venusians that I'm talking to told me that the 200,000 years ago in Sedona, there's some ancient record of their first contact here on Earth, and all that. A lot of these things will be brought forward. Have you? Are there currently any sphere being walk-ins on the Earth that you would know?
I don't know if I'd call them walk-ins, but yes, there's a large number of people here on this planet now that are from the Blue Avian Soul Group, and including myself and my family, my kids. I was told that very soon after I met Tyr for the first time, I was told that I was here on a mission, that I was from their soul group. Probably a good number of people here that are as well, because they seem to be, birds of a feather flock together.
I'm from the parakeet family. Have you read the Law of One?
You're the parakeet in the coal mine?
Yeah, there you go. The Muhammad Accords update, and this is a natural human reaction. Why is the SSP Alliance not shut down the global torture network of civilians and things that's going on there?
Well, the SSP Alliance is not Solar Warden. A lot of people say Solar Warden is the SSP Alliance. The SSP Alliance is a group of individuals that come from all of the space programs. They broke away. So they broke away and took assets with them. So it's not the Solar Warden proper that is running or the bulk of the Secret Space Program Alliance. I know a lot of this stuff is very confusing because there's a lot of information.
Okay. I had a question, but I better ask this one first because I lost it, but what health secrets did Kari, secrets or, I'm sorry, I can't read that one. Corey, what has been the most powerful deprogramming experience that allowed you to cover memories in safety, human or non-human? Was that Mayan?
Well, I had conscious recall of my memories for a long time. After one of my eye surgeries, I had a detached retina, and when they went in, I remember the surgeon saying, "Your retina is like a canned tomato. It's just," he said, "this is no different than astronaut's eye." And I didn't say anything, but after my surgery, after I was in the recovery room, one of the nurses came in and said, "So in the recovery room, you were talking about your work." And my eyes got about this big, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "A lot of stuff about being out in space and stuff like that." She seemed like she wanted me to talk more about it, but I was kind of shocked that I had blabbed so much, while under the influence.
So it's kind of interesting. Kari kind of got loosened up on some little unearthed mushroom juice or something. So
The
here we
elixir
have
of Isis, yeah.
comment on the use of substances to alter the neurological system for sensitivity.
For what specific?
I mean, you would kind of think a fourth dimensional being might be kind of tuned in.
Well, they're fourth density.
Fourth density.
Yeah,
Here she's taking a drink to get connected.
Yeah, and the different densities, it's these beings, they pretty much measure, put a person in that category depending on their consciousness. The density level has to do with how your consciousness has progressed, and then your physical body follows that vibration. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think that fourth density beings or fifth density beings are invisible. You're reaching through them, they're all around you. But just think, a cow, what density is that? Second? Well, can you interact with a cow? Obviously. First density, you can interact with rocks, you can interact with bacteria. So these higher density beings are physical. You interact with them on a physical level. It's just their consciousness is of a higher vibratory state, and their bodies have followed their consciousness through that process. And they can change their vibratory state and disappear. They can, depending on how developed they are. A lot of the time, very of these, higher density beings, they really don't have a need for craft. They think of a place they want to be, think of the vibration of that place, and then adjust their vibration to match it. And it's kind of, like almost like quantum entanglement or quantum physics. They appear, if their frequency is the frequency of where they want to be, they're there.
That's even the Draco?
No. This is the higher density beings that.
Draco are like 3D like us?
Yeah, and well, they're not 3D. They're most of them are fourth density negative, from what I understand.
We got to keep the questions up here for the video so people don't have empty spaces that they don't hear what was asked. Do you think the blue sphere beings are protecting us from these radiations that would precipitate a pole shift or something like this? And at some point, do they pull away? And
Yes, they
allow things to happen?
They're protecting us from these energetic waves that are coming in. They're ebbing and flowing. It's the energy will pick up and be real heavy, and then it'll stop for a little while. And these spheres are buffering this energy that's coming in to our solar system, and they are slowly fading out of our reality over time. And eventually, once we're acclimated enough and we start to, be able to handle these energies, they're going to fade completely out, disappear, probably will not say goodbye. It'll just be gone. That's what they've led me to expect.
Anytime.
And then after that, there are two other beings that have not been introduced to our density yet that are going to work closely with us and after this energetic shift.
Two other beings or?
Two other Sphere Being Alliance members.
Oh, okay. Now, the Sphere Being Alliance, we've got thousands of ships. You've met a triangle. You've got the Mayans that are working with them.
No, the Sphere Being Alliance is 5 groups. The Blue Avians, the Golden Triangle-headed beings, and the Blue Spheres are actual beings.
The
they're
spheres,
not craft.
they're not
beings.
They're not.
The same little blue sphere that comes to pick me up out of my room is the same type of blue sphere that I am inside when I'm talking to Tier Air. It's the same type of blue sphere that encompasses our entire solar system, forming a barrier. It is a being.
A being. Is that a social memory complex, like in the book of the Ra, or?
Well, I'm told that they are 9th density. They're the highest density being of the Sphere Being Alliance. So people should be more excited when you see a blue sphere than you would if you saw a blue avian pop up here.
Okay. Obviously, people have to make their own choices, and I'm sure there's different biochemistries that are better, but someone's asking about, is meat okay?
Not for me. After my mind meld with Kari, something happened. I've always been an extremely compassionate person, but I cannot bring myself to eat anything that once had a face.
Okay.
I just can't do it.
Okay,
I physically would get ill.
Someone wants to know who killed JFK. I'm going to say the Khazarian Mafia, and Lyndon Johnson knew about it, and it was orchestrated.
I don't know who killed JFK, and I don't know who did 9/11.
I do. That was the Khazarian Mafia. They did have a did have a group, and it was actually run by a.
I can't hear you.
They were run by a group that set charges at night. I met the keymaster. For 2 weeks, he was forced to give up his keys to the because they did all of the work in the. His name is William Rodriguez. You could Google him, the keymaster. But he went into every building. He was the head of the janitors, and they couldn't do anything. And he told me personally every night, every weekend when he came back, there were extra blue containers just filled with concrete dust before that. So unfortunately,
Can we do a few more?
Pardon?
A few more questions?
Yeah, we got more questions here.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's almost 8:30.
What time is it?
It's 8:22.
8:20, and we started at 6:30, so yeah, we got a few more. Okay. What is your involvement and awareness of the Ganymede, Jupiter, or any of its moons in the Super Federation 40?
There are certain moons that I can't give specifics about who's on them, but some of the Super Federation allies are housed on them in their embassies. And like I said before, no one is allowed anywhere near the area. It is a quarantined no-go zone. And if you happen to stray into that area, there's a good chance that you may not come back.
Yeah, our friend Louis, who was here last month, was taken there and invited there, and I understand it's a very positive group.
Yes, if you're invited, you can come, but it's not somewhere you want to trespass.
The Muhammad Accords update, we heard from you that you went there and everyone was ready, but the Dracos are not coming to dinner.
Yeah.
So they can't avoid that very long. It seems like eventually they'll be, I don't think they can force them, but they can say if you don't show up, your vote is null and void. You'll have to avoid.
What people don't realize is cosmically, it is a huge bureaucracy.
Worse than the post office?
Yeah. These groups, they have cosmic law that they are very serious about abiding to. The negative groups that don't abide to it, they end up paying for it in the long run, but in the short run, they get away with a lot. And that's.
So I guess what's the rule of non-interference?
It could be thousands of years.
Yeah. So don't plan on the event anytime soon. Why is the rule of non-interference not applied to the Dracos?
Well, the law is there, but they disobey it. And just because they disobey the law doesn't mean these benevolent groups are going to do the same. It's not like you hear in politics. Oh yeah, I use an email server because they use an email server. They don't cop out that easily. They're very much invested in their laws, and they're not going to, if these negative groups are breaking the law, they're going to find a way within their law to hold them accountable.
Yeah, that's a higher way. We're in a matrix. We've heard about the plasma scalar field. You've talked about your own entity attachment. We've talked about implants of various kinds. I personally don't really. A lot of people are doing implant removals. I don't know how anyone would know that. Can you lend your light, your intelligence, and your understanding of the plasma scalar field network and how implants work with the AI? You've mentioned that it goes through electronics in the computer, and it kind of comes and goes. It lays nascent within a planet. How can we overcome this? What is our...
Well, AI attachment, implant attachments, and entity attachments are very different in how they are handled and how they operate.
Can you take us through that?
If you have trauma or something in your life that you're still holding on to, and you haven't forgiven yourself or forgiven others that have caused that trauma becomes like a tangible ball that entities and other attachments can be attached to. So it is very important, one of the best ways to be totally free of these attachments is to go through the process of forgiving people that may have done some of the most horrible things to you, because if you haven't let go, they still have just as much power over you now as when they were victimizing you. And believe it or not, what's even harder than forgiving someone who's victimized you is to sit back and shine the light on the inside into all the dark places that you normally would never really want to visit. You know, all of us, there's something about us that we know needs to be fixed. But if we don't go shine the light, forgive ourselves, and move on, that is more detrimental than not forgiving others.
Okay, let's go. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about entity attachment and that type of thing. I witnessed that with a military guy when I was very young. He showed me, and I was like, I don't know if I was able to see, but I was able to see the vibrational change and understand that. And it kind of reminded me of being in a bar where, you know, someone's drunk and they're just like, ah, and you go out of their space about 5 feet and they just
don't know you exist.
So what's this entity thing? Are these disincarnate spirits? Are these actual different entities? Are these humans that are caught here in traps and are being used?
There are many types of entities that are used as tools to manage people. In a lot of cases, if you're in that 3 to 5% of people that once you're blank slated, the memory starts to come back, well, they know that they can't control you by blank slating you. So they'll use entity attachments. And they'll program the entities to activate or to attack you when you are, like, if you started to try to talk about, if you were in the secret space program and you started to try to talk out loud, these entity attachments will make you start to stammer, have a speech impediment, or just go blank. They affect you like that. It's, you know, it's not, you don't start convulsing and doing all this weird stuff, you know, like some might imagine.
So
it seems like just like a personality quirk or something, you know, if you were talking to a person that had an entity attachment that was being used as a tool to keep them from accessing memories.
describe to us some of the different entities. Are these like these invisible little like octopus that go on you who can be programmed? Are these other things? I mean, and these entities have no other thing in life than to, do they feed off your loose? They said, hey, you can feed on this guy's loose if you just keep him stammering?
Yes, they feed off of our life force energy, and most of them are from what Thierry calls the outer realm. And he said that when these energetic changes happen, that all of these beings will be pushed back where they came from to the outer realm. And when that does happen, people that had entity attachments, a lot of times entity attachments are a symbiotic kind of thing. We all know people out there that are vampires. They'll sit there and talk horribly to you and do whatever it takes to get a reaction out of you that their attached entity can feed off of.
Them, yeah.
And then that entity gives them back, like, 10%, finder's fee, here's a little bit of energy for you. Yeah, and the people are getting off on this energy and they get addicted to it. Yeah, it's a high. And when these entities are removed from them, they go through a withdrawal. Like, if you quit smoking cigarettes cold turkey, you're noodling all around in your living room trying to figure out what's going on. Well, that's what happens to these people. They fall to the ground and they no longer have their fix.
Let's talk about the next type of part of the plasma scalar field network that is kind of run through a television and there's an implant. Now, are these implants, Cobra talks about nanites, that are super small that have been placed in the cabal that will be used to freeze them. It kind of goes both ways for the good and the bad. And
They've been placed in a lot of the general population as well.
so
Through
tell us,
flu vaccinations and other things. And
you heard that.
flu vaccinations are used. Viruses are a very good delivery mechanism for changes to your genome. They can, with a virus, they can piggyback a genetic change they want to make to us, and then inject it into us, and then our body will integrate it into our genome through the virus.
So an implant is actually part of our genetic makeup after a period of time?
No, the implants are, they can be energetic and they can be technological, but they don't become a part of your genome.
Okay, so let's talk about the
Can we do like two more?
we'll finish. I just want to finish this question up, this line of questioning, and then we'll go. The genetic or the implant aspect of the physical one, I was shown in the back. I got a vision that they actually attenuate cell phone towers, the Gwen towers. These technologies are actually profiled to genetic racial phenotypes to cause illness through the vaccination implant, and the virus actually can cause illness in people as well. Is that part of the NIGR program prognosis?
I do know that they like piggyback like carrier waves and stuff through the same technology and use it as kind of like repeaters to send their mind control network further
Can
into the
these
population.
implants be removed? Is there any process that's known? I mean, people talk about it, and
I don't know the exact process for removing all these different types. There's a process to remove the AI. They use drugs and a mild shock to stun them, so they can then remove them. When it comes to entities, I have not seen them remove them in the SSP. I removed them in the manner that I described previously myself.
When you went to the Mayan?
No, the Mayan thing, that occurred after I didn't finish talking, after I had the eye surgery. I had a full recall of a lot of the negative stuff that I myself on a subconscious level had locked away. It all came back, and I was literally almost suicidal.
Yeah, you needed to forgive yourself, and they aided you, right?
So it was the first time I ran across Gonzalez. He was like a military observer with the Mayans that picked me up, and they put this halo thing. They called it a halo. It's kind of horseshoe shaped, and they put it above my head, and then just like it sucked to my skull. And there was a hovering, looked like block of stone floating in the room, and they were touching the stone. And after that, they helped me lock away some of the memories, and then also they took the energy away, the association, trauma association I had with the memories.
Okay, the last question in this series here. So when you go on board with Raw Tier, I mean, there's no implants. Are they suspended? You remove the entities. Have you had the implants removed from you?
Yes. The only implants I had were of an entity attachment type, and those were completely removed.
And you had some physical ones that they just neutralized for you?
I don't know that I had any physical attachments.
I meant implants, not attachments.
Well, that's what
Does the average human being on Earth with vaccinations and various things, what percentage of the population would you say is implanted and has that?
A large, now this is something that a lot of people may not like to hear, but there is not one person on this planet right now that is not under some sort of mind control. All of us here right now, we are still subject and victims of mind control. It's pervasive in every bit of our culture, just our way of life. Our way of life is mind control. The language that in our different cultures, a lot of times people will say, well, that's a cultural thing. Well, that developed over a period of time to control people,
Right.
within their own cultures.
Okay, I guess I'm going to one last question.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
What's the story of Hillary Clinton? Is there any possibility that she's working with the good force, or she's just completely out there on
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I that was asked, and that was my response, and I respect the person who gave it to me, and I just wanted to reiterate what my feeling was, and
just because the SSP and other groups were really strong behind Bernie Sanders and Trump doesn't mean that either one of those two are positive.
Right, I agree.
It just means that they are not a part of the current control system.
Right, and so the Hillary thing, is that part of like the clone breaking down, maybe?
She's got some. I feel
help
I know she's a negative person, but I don't like to see anyone suffer.
I know.
She's got some major health issues.
Health issues that comes from God. Thank you so much, Corey Good, and amazing. Thank you so much for this information.